I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode with author and Tyghtwyre CEO Jeff Callan. He's amassed 50,000 hours in various product management and strategy leadership roles, working with everyone from startups to Fortune 100 companies. As a growth focused product leader and mentor, he has established a proven track record of transforming innovative ideas into mobile and data products with over 10 million customers multiple times. During the course of his career, Jeff's teams have generated more than $1 billion in new bottom line value for partners and customers through cost savings, strategic partnerships, and revenue growth activities. In August 2023, Jeff published his Amazon Product Management #1 bestseller, What Makes Great Products Great? A Product Management Bootcamp. This book has been recognized as one of the best on the topic and earned Jeff a spot on Pavel Urin's ultimate list of product people, alongside industry giants like Marty Kagan, Teresa Torres, and Simon Sinek. Welcome to the episode, Jeff, and I hope you have a wonderful time listening to this episode where we delve into strategies for effective collaboration, how to build great product teams. Let's get into it. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Growth Design Podcast. And as always, I've got my co-host Emmanuel.
Hi guys, good to be back again.
And on today's episode, we have a very incredible guest. His name is Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hi guys, nice to see you. Nice to be here.
All right. And in today's episode, we are going to be dealing a lot with strategies around effective collaboration and mostly talking about this in the context of building great product teams. Now, as you know from the intro, Jeff has a lot of years of experience when it comes to product management and also when it comes to building teams, whether it's medium, large scale, or small. He's got experience across board. And so, Jeff, can you tell us about your journey? How did you get started in product management?
Well, that's a long story. I'll try and give you the short version, but it really goes back to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I built my own toys. I was a pretty creative kid and just wanted to figure out how things worked. And so over time, that just put me on a path to deciding as a career I wanted to build things. And it was a natural fit for me to end up in product management after spending some time doing other jobs. After I got my schooling, I landed in a product management job at Cincinnati Bell Telephone, and that led me to Sprint, a mobile carrier here in the US, which is now part of T-Mobile. And I was there for just shy of 20 years. And I was basically the guy that they tossed new technology to, and they said, go figure this out and come back with ideas. We're not sure what to do with it, but you'll come back with ideas. And so basically, I worked with a lot of leading edge technology. I was doing things with large language models and predictive text way back 20 years ago, and have watched that technology evolve. I've built platforms around data and analytics, and basically now I'm a product management consultant. I work with a lot of startups and scale ups who are looking for a guy who knows how to take ideas and build, launch, and scale them.
That's amazing. So, what you've described, that's a lot of different kinds of experiences that you've gotten over the years. And we're curious about how you define effective collaboration within these different environments. And also, how has that applied to designers over the years in that product team dynamics?
Oh, sure. I always say that there are 4 key steps to a high performing team. Make sure that you're hiring the right people. That's the beginning for everything. Give them clear roles and responsibilities. Make sure that they have the resources to execute on those responsibilities, and then get out of their way, let them do the work, and measure the results. And if you can't do that last thing, then you probably didn't hire the right people. So in general, whether it's a product team or any team, I think those 4 steps are key. Beyond that, when you're talking about collaboration, it's really about clear communication. It's about having transparency with the rest of the team so they understand what you're doing and why. And at the end of the day, a high performing team needs to have trust and respect for everybody on the team. Now, as far as you had asked about how does that apply to designers within the product team, it's again an emphasis on clear roles so that everybody knows what they're doing. There needs to be an understanding that the product managers are trying to balance a range of stakeholder needs. A lot of people come to the product team with a narrow slice of a perspective. So, understanding that the product manager needs to synthesize all of those stakeholder needs and come up with a decision that balances everything out. I think it's important for the product manager to recognize that there are different subject matter expertise on the team. And while a good product manager is frequently a generalist, it's important to understand that they don't know everything and that there are people on the team who have that expertise and that they should be willing to rely on them. I think it's important to have early involvement on the team, regular touch points, so that you're not bringing the designer in at the last minute and asking them to do things and they haven't had a chance to participate in the early planning sessions. It's important, I think, for everyone on the team to understand the importance of diversity from a perspective standpoint and the empathy that having diverse people on the team brings a better product. If you understand how different people live rather than having a mono view of the world, you're more likely to build products that are going to be able to meet a range of people. And then the last thing is really making sure that you assume positive intent with everybody on the team. Nobody wants to go to work and screw it up. I think in general, people want to do a great job. And so if you assume that people are coming from that space and that they have positive intent, even if you don't understand or agree with the decisions that are being made, I think that's always a helpful thing.
All right, one of the things that stood out to me as you were talking was also about that getting out of the way and letting people do the work, right? And I see how that is important as well in the context of a product manager. Speaking as a designer, a product manager recognizing that there are certain subject matter experts, and as much as you oversee that entire structure, or at least have an overview of that, you still have to give space to people to get things done. And now, before we go to the next question, I'm curious to find out because with the evolution of product management today, there are conversations around how PMs need to be able to do things around like wireframing. And there are scenarios where PMs go as far as actually working within Figma, for example. Like with all of that context I had provided about the product manager and how we're seeing these kind of behaviors in the workplace today, how does that particularly speak to when it comes to that effective collaboration between product management as a unit and then design as another unit? What's your opinion about how we think about what that collaboration could look like between the two?
Well, it's again making sure that everybody has clear roles, but ultimately, a lot of this boils down to using data to inform your choices, whether they're from a product side or whether they're from the design side. And if you're using shared KPIs and metrics, if you're doing data driven discovery and design, if you're building the product from the ground up with data needs in mind, you're talking to all the stakeholders, you're asking them to understand their wish list for the things that you can collect when you're gathering data from the product. All of that is a big piece of it. I also think that it's important to understand that there are timeline impacts to all of this. We get very swept up in on time delivery, and that's obviously critical. It's important for everybody to be on the same page in terms of if you're going to invest in data driven discovery, that everybody's on the same page as to what that means and what that might add from a timeline perspective. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does, because then it sets it up for like thinking about what the common pitfalls are when teams try to collaborate effectively. What has that been in your experience?
Wow, there's a number of them, but I think the very first one and the A business runs on communication. And I saw a recent study from Grammarly that suggests that we are spending more time than ever communicating with each other. But a lot of that is written communication these days. It's asynchronous, so it's emails, of course, it's Slack channels, it's DMs, it's text messages. And so there's so much communication that's going on, and there's so much communication that's needed to make sure that you're aligned on what you're supposed to be doing. So misaligned goals would be a second one. We're working on one aspect, or targeting one thing, and the other people on the team are doing something completely different. I had a situation back when I was at Sprint where I was trying to troubleshoot a product. It was a location-based product, and we were getting messages from the support teams that basically said problem with the product, and it wasn't a whole lot of additional information involved. From the cares team's perspective, they were logging that there was a problem with my product, but they weren't giving me the detail that I needed. So I met with the manager of the department, and I said, if you could just ask one more question, I would be able to actually troubleshoot these. So could you ask them, where are you located and what time did this thing happen, because it was location based? And that would give us a chance to look at the network conditions in that area during that time of day, and we might find patterns over time. And I'll never forget, the manager of the team came back. They said, no, we can't do that. And I looked at him kind of like, well, why not? And he said, well, we get measured on the length of the call. So we're trying to handle these care calls as quickly as possible. If I add more questions to the list, then that's going to drive our call handling time up. And that's not what our bonuses are based on. So if you have misaligned goals, we never got the information that we needed. If you have misaligned goals, stuff like that's going to happen. I think one of the other big things that I see as a common pitfall is siloed thinking. It's okay to have clear roles and responsibilities, but that doesn't mean that you don't think about how other people might react and respond. You're not the only perspective on the team. And so you can think outside your silo, even if your role is well defined. And I see that happening a lot. And then the last one is just simple ego. Ego and a lack of empathy, a lack of that understanding of the other person's perspective, or thinking that you're bigger than the team, or for whatever reason, you just don't get along with the rest of your team. To me, that might be the single biggest driver besides communication.
I'm curious, how have you resolved this? You've talked about that example with the manager, the support manager. When you have those misaligned goals, what are the different ways in which we can begin to work together to figure out solutions for these things?
Oh, well, there's a lot of it, again, boils down to simple communication, creating feedback opportunities for people to talk about their perspectives on things. Again, the data aspect is also a key element, because there's a quote, and I'm going to screw up the guy who said it, but the gist of the quote was, if we have data, let's use data. If all we have is opinions, let's use mine. And so
Okay.
you get into that kind of a situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And still on misaligned goals, part of it is rallying the team behind a shared vision, basically. And
Oh,
this,
sure.
this is oftentimes where the concept of a North Star becomes very crucial for product teams, right? So, how can defining a North Star improve the alignment of the team and the collaboration?
Well, first of all, having a unified vision gives focus and clarity to everyone on the team. It reduces all those conflicts, right? Because if you know where you're going, then it's easy to align the oars and all row the boat in the same direction. If you're not in agreement with where you're going, then you're potentially rowing around in circles. Another thing that you get with the North Star is just team inspiration, from knowing how the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis aligns with the big picture goals of the company. And it's, when you're working in your cubicle or at home in a hybrid role or a remote role. It's easy to feel distanced from the overall mission of the company, but North Star helps give you that why, that reason for this is why we do the things we do. And the other advantage that a North Star has is that because people understand the general direction that they're heading in, the leaders don't always have to be in the room when decisions are being made. It enables you to decentralize some of your decision making process because the people in the room all have that same big picture vision. So it makes it easier, can cover more ground, you can move faster because you aren't going through a hierarchical decision making process.
Mm. And how does this typically, I mean, if you can give practical examples of certain North Star metrics and then how this trickles down within different teams and becomes relevant to the work that people do?
Having those common OKRs are really a good way to ensure alignment. And again, making sure that you're not just making decisions based on my opinion or your opinion, but tying it back to the data. It tells people what success looks like. And I think you can't underestimate the impact of doing that, to having this example that everyone can look at and say, oh, if we accomplish this, we're winning, because it's real hard in the business environment to know when you're winning.
Yeah. So, as we think about the North Star, when it's obviously this gets broken down and then trickles down to across different teams, like we've talked about. But then when they're set at org levels, what are the different practical tips or frameworks that you can take to break down? So, if I was a PM or as a designer, I'm not looking at this North Star that's been handed down from the organization. What are the frameworks I could use to break this down into something that's more relevant and actionable within my sector?
And so, one thing I'll say right up front is it's okay to have product level North Stars in a multi product company. It's a lot more difficult if you're a single product company to have product level North Stars that don't align with the business North Star. They should be the same, right?
Yeah.
But in a multi product company, it can be a little different, although you're still going to want to align with the overall goals of the company. So if your company is taking a value based approach, you're probably not going to want to have a premium product strategy. So there's things to be aware of like that. What I typically do is I start with my North Star, and then I add a situation assessment or a SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats view of the world. And those two things give you the where you're going and where you are today view of the world. And so a lot of what you're trying to do when you're building out a product strategy is take the current view of the world and say, okay, what do I need to do to get from here to there? So that's where you start to create your OKRs, your goals, and try to figure out, okay, ask the question, if I execute on these things, if I hit these OKRs, will the North Star happen?
Hmm.
And when you say yes, then that's a good goal or OKR to have as part of your set. Those goals then lead to creating the business strategies, and business strategies can be high level, like increase sales, decrease costs, that type of thing. It's when you get to that tactical level is where the rubber really meets the road, or the roadmap, as it were. So you're basically taking that North Star plus SWOT to OKRs and goals, strategies, and then tactics.
I've really been enjoying the conversations between you both, and been scribbling a lot of notes here. So, one thing that you said when you intro the conversation that really struck me, it looks like I was hearing that for the first time when you said most businesses survive through communication. Really, when I thought through it, I felt like that's really true. Like, look at a company without communication flows and everything, like how things are going to be very disconnected, even if they have great product. So this conversation is kind of leading me towards talking about feedbacks and prioritization. Like, we cannot agree that feedbacks is really essential for product development. And in terms of communication now, what are your recommendations to building a very feedback rich product environment? How do you set that pace?
I think it's critical to have feedback loops, but more so, I think from the perspective of the product manager, I always tell people how I explain it to my mom is a product manager sits in a swivel chair and they swivel and they talk to a customer and they start to understand their pain points and how they're using or what they might be doing to alleviate those pain points today. Because usually, if you're feeling a pain, you're trying to do something to alleviate it. It's just
Yeah.
maybe not successful. So, understand those pain points and then swivel in the chair and talk to a developer team and say, this is what we're going to build to alleviate these pain points. Talk with the design team and say, this is what we're going to build, and this is what we need you to do. Swivel and talk to the marketing team and talk to them about here's the customer's pain points, here's the value proposition that we need to communicate back to the customer. And then talking with care team, talking with sales team, and making sure that you're getting all of those inputs as part of the process. It's important to try and build as much of a 360 view of your
Mm.
product
Yeah.
as you possibly can. And so having those feedback loops, especially the support and the sales one, because they're actually interacting directly with customers. So when you as a design team, as a product team, don't necessarily always have opportunities to talk to customers, but sales teams and care teams are doing that all the time. And so being able to pull information from those different teams and use that. I think it's important to expand on the product triad that a lot of people are familiar with more of a product team approach with all the key stakeholders. So I've most of the teams that I've had have had product development, design, the basic triad, but also representation from care, representation from marketing, representation from legal, because I'm also thinking about terms and conditions, or maybe I'm thinking about data privacy issues. And so having that broad view, again, creating that 360 view of the product. And the only way you're going to get that is by having those feedback loops in place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So talking about feedback loops, right? So let's look at the scenario. You talked about the 360 approach where all teams are kind of in circle communicating with each other. For a small team, communication loop is going to be very fast and short, right?
Sure.
They kind of have less steps of communication or these loops. But when it comes to large companies, right, where you have lots of system already built, what are system do you think we could put in place to ensure that some of this feedback get from the customer to probably the product team or to the designer in this case now, that the designer is able to work on this feedback, take action timely, and getting this back to production so that the feedback loop is not necessarily too long.
Well, one of the ways, and probably the listeners are familiar with Teresa Torres' continuous discovery habits.
Hmm.
If you're doing things on a regular basis, then I think makes it faster in general, simply because you've always got a bus that's going to be coming by. You don't have to gear up to do a thing and have all that lead time that is, let's figure out our process, let's figure out how we're going to implement. You get that workflow in place, that discovery workflow in place, and then you've got a constant set of feedback coming in from that, right? So that's one of the big things. In many ways, though, the answer to this depends on a couple of things. Are we talking a consumer product? Are we talking about a business product? Because they're going to potentially have very different flows from information. If I'm pulling stuff from a sales team, it's different than if I'm passively collecting data from a consumer application and doing A/B testing. One of the things that I would ask back to you or your listeners is, what do you want to see and how often do you want to see it? My processes are going to be different. If I'm trying to do something on a frequent basis, then I might be trying to do a lot more in-app and passive collection. If I've got a longer cycle, then quarterly surveys is maybe more appropriate. So it really does depend on what the team needs and how often they want to see it.
So we've got so many feedbacks coming in, right? What roles does prioritization play in team collaboration, and how do we get better at prioritizing most important things to do?
So, at a very basic level, you're never going to have the time or resources to do everything on your to
Yeah.
do list. I mean, I would ask your listeners to look at their to do list and tell me how many times have they ever been able to scratch that last thing off of the list. I mean, my list is always longer than I can possibly get done. And if there's someone out there who's got that figured out, I would like them to contact me and tell me what their system is, because but every step of the product development process, I think, requires clear prioritization, because you're always trying to optimize resources
Yeah.
and make sure that you're working on the next best thing. I think we make it harder than it has to be, though. One of my favorite techniques is a very simple one to prioritize things, and it's basically a value versus effort matrix. And I take a list of the things that I'm trying to do, whether it's a feature list, whether it's my weekend to do list. I take them and I say, what's the value? What's the level of effort? And I rank them in both of those categories: high, medium, or low.
Mhm.
And then what you're looking for, that will break the tasks out into three tiers. The first tier, I usually have these in green, yellow, and red on the matrix, is what I call the profitable tier. It's the things where the level of effort is less than the value that it's creating. So it's the high value, medium effort, the high value, low effort, the medium value, low effort. Those are all in the tier that I call profitable. Then you have the second tier, which is what I call the break even tier, which is where the level of effort is the same as the value being produced. So the high, medium, medium, low tier. And then you've got the bottom tier, which is what I call the subsidy tier, where the level of effort is greater than the value that it brings back. And you got to be really careful with those projects, right? Because you can sink a lot of time in them and not get much back. So as long as you're working on green tier tasks, I think that you're good, and then you'll dip into those break even tasks when you've exhausted, or maybe some from time to time there'll be a high value, high effort thing that's a break even task, but it's so high value that you really just need to do it. So I can do something like that in 30 minutes or less. I can give that same list out to the team and ask them to score these things high, medium, and low, and then kind of create a composite view from the team's standpoint of those same tiers. But it doesn't have to be hard. That's something, like I said, I can do it in 30 minutes or less. I can do it once a week. I can do it once a month. It's not a heavy lift to do it. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense. I think I even have to write that down. Like, I like the way you kind of break those things into tiers. Like, we all familiar with the high, low, the kind of direct one that talks about the effort and the value. But I like the way you now break it down into tiers: profitable tiers, break-even tiers, and subsidy tier. Like, make more sense and kind of able to see a bigger picture, compared to just some of those little pebbles. So going into collaboration, right? Building a culture of collaboration, right? How can a product leader foster a culture where product managers and designer, say growth designer, kind of appreciate each other and not get into each other's zone? Like Ine was trying to make the other time when you have product managers coming into Figma, trying to take the role of a designer, and also a designer not also taking the role of a PM, maybe writing PRDs or doing sort of how can we kind of balance that in terms of fostering the culture of collaboration in a team?
Oh, that's a great question. Again, I come back to clear roles and responsibilities so that people understand what they're trying to do, but also understand that those different roles, even if they're clear, means that you have different perspectives. Even if you have common vision and common OKRs, you're bringing different perspectives to the work. And
Yeah.
so it's really important to understand that. Again, focus on establishing and building trust and empathy with the rest of your team. So and then there's just kind of some foundational things that happen around having product teams so that you're working with each other, you're in meetings together, you're having joint planning sessions where everybody is able to provide feedback early enough in the cycle that it's there shouldn't be surprises. You shouldn't be knocking on somebody's door saying, I need this and I needed it yesterday. Everything doesn't need to be chaos. And if you are experiencing a lot of chaos, I would suggest that you need to look at A, your prioritization, and B, your process,
Mm.
because we tend, I think, to get so wrapped up in the adrenaline that comes with the chaos that we start to turn things into chaotic situations just so we can get that hit, right? And we let things burn, smolder, and we can see the smoke, but it's not until they burst into open flame that we actually decide to deal with them. And so if you understand the roles, if you have clear prioritization, I think that it really helps product managers, designers understand and appreciate each other.
Great. I really love the way you answered that. So, as a product leader, I see your bio and you've got a lot of experience, in terms of PMs and everything. Are there specific initiatives, like examples of initiative or activities that you think could really promote cross-functional collaboration or understanding within teams, like in your years of experience that you could, suggest?
There certainly are. I mean, I think that one of the things that has to happen is building that culture of collaboration. And so recognizing at the end of the day somebody's responsible to make the call and that you have to respect the decisions that are getting made and do your best to move forward with them. For whatever reason, it may not be your role to make the decision. You are an input to the decision, but it's not your final call. You've got to learn to live with that. And transparency in the decision making process, I think, goes a long way. So making sure that people understand the whys behind the decisions, not just the decisions, is always helpful. I think when you have people who not only understand the work that they're trying to do, but why it's important and how it relates to that overall strategy, you're going to have a better chance of getting people all on the same page. The other thing that I think is really critical here, like some very specific activities,
Yeah.
is recognizing that your dev cycle kind of starts with that joint planning session. So you're doing this stuff as a group and it ends with postmortem. So you're looking back at the process and saying, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we do this better? How can we work better as a team?
Mm.
If you do that as the beginning and the end, I think a lot of what happens in between becomes much more cross functional and collaborative.
Yeah, so I think it's a great place to segue into our last one, which is around celebration culture to promote more collaboration. So, in your experience, what are some ways to sort of celebrate those wins when you've had successful collaborations across product teams and just a way to reinforce the efforts of the combined team, right?
Well, the combined team is a series of individuals. And so, definitely one size fits all things that you can do around team outings and acknowledgments and awards and that type of thing. But I think you want to know your team well enough to know what motivates them at an individual level and not just that one size fits all checklist. I mean, when you talk about culture, I've seen startups where it's like, yeah, we have a foosball table in the break room and we have a keg on Friday. So that takes care of culture for the week. And then they walk around like jerks the other 39 hours of the week and they're undoing the culture that they've created. So part of this is about creating a daily habit of acknowledgement and appreciation. Your team building is done every day. And so if you get feedback from your team, if you listen to what they say, that's going to go a long way with a lot of people on the team, right? Just having a voice, feeling like you're heard. The important piece is to listen and act. It's not just listen. Listening is nice, but you'd like to see some movement sometimes on some key things in order to feel like you're really being heard. The other thing that I think is important is to recognize that this is not just about successes. Some of the best work I've ever done in my career was on projects that failed.
Mm.
And when you think about it, it's easy sometimes to be on a project that's winning. You've got all the resources, you're all aligned, everything's going smoothly. You're not really breaking a sweat. You break a sweat when things are going bad. You break a sweat when you're trying to figure out how to save a project that you're sensing is not going as well as it could be. And so you end up putting in a lot of extra effort to try to save this thing, and then it still fails. But and then we shall never speak of it again. I'm not really in that camp. I think that you need to acknowledge the fact that there was great work, hard work that went into it, even when it did fail, and recognize that in some way, and not just on to the next thing. And like I said, bury the failure.
That's really awesome. I think it reminds me of this sort of documentation I do whenever I join a company as regarding like stakeholders mapping. And it's just a collection of my anecdotes about things I've noticed about different stakeholders and how they like to work, what their little quirks potentially are around how they receive work, how they collaborate, how they just work within a team structure. I wonder how, if this is perhaps one of those times where if you're able to, I mean, I'm not saying that you have to do this in every role that you do, but it's just a personal thing. If you do that sort of activity from the get go and maintain that document, it becomes easier as time goes on for you to then notice what is personalized for each person within a team. And it makes it easier to find those moments of celebration and gratitude across board. So, just as a
Yeah.
note.
Yeah, and it's easy to say thank you or I appreciate you. And that goes a long way towards building a culture where people like each other. I mean, think about how much time we spend in the workplace or with our colleagues. You'd like to have that be a happy place and not just a chaotic, angry place. And so, what are you doing every day to make it the workplace that you would like to work in? And so if we all are doing the things that lead to the workplace we want to work in, then in general, we should be landing closer to that than if we're not trying.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much for this episode, Jeff. This has been really fantastic. And just to summarize everything that we've talked about, we began by setting the stage for collaboration and just exploring the different ways and contexts to understand what that looks like in a product in dynamics. We talked about aligning around a shared vision, thinking about that North Star metric and how that trickles down, and Jeff shared some wonderful frameworks around how that can be broken down into different ways of working for product teams. And then we also looked at feedback and prioritization and how that can be a method for continuing to encourage that culture of collaboration within different teams. And finally, under the culture of collaboration, we've now talked about the different ways in which you can just go, like, it's a simple thank you and just appreciating your colleagues and helping them recognize that this is the work that they're doing is seen, is recognized by you. And thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. It's been a fantastic conversation with you.
Absolutely, I've enjoyed it. And if any of this resonates with the listeners that are out there, I'd love to have them reach out to me and connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the reason that I do what I do, is to connect with other people.
Just to also emphasize on the background point that I think we've not really mentioned in the podcast is that Jeff actually has a book on how to build great products, and I think it's really a great book out there. So I would really encourage other product leaders, managers, designers out there to kind of get the book, read more about how to build great products. It's an amazing book, and definitely it's going to be helpful. And maybe Jeff can talk a bit about the book and how it could help us. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think the thing that I want to make sure that people know is if they go to whatmakesgreatproductsgreat.com, they can download a free sample, 10-page sample, the first 10 pages of the book, along with the table of contents and some other information. So they can basically go out and figure out whether they want to read the rest of the thing. So there's that. They can also go and download of all the templates, all the graphics, and that's all free too. So 2 big free downloads on the website before they have to decide if they want to buy the book. The book itself basically emerged as a COVID project. I was trying to figure out how to be a content creator. And I very quickly realized that I didn't have the beach body to be an Instagram influencer or the dance moves to be a TikTok star, but I could write a little bit. So I thought I was going to write a product blog. And so before I started the blog, I wanted to have a year's worth of blog post ideas. So I sat down and I brainstormed 50 or so. And as I'm looking at these blog post ideas, I realized I think there's a book in there. So I pivoted away from the blog idea and just started writing the book. And it came out last year, and it's been fairly well received. So I would encourage people to check it out if it sounds like it might resonate with them.
Yeah, I can definitely recommend the book as I've read it myself. And that is actually how Jeff and I connected because it had come into my LinkedIn feed and I downloaded, read the book, and then we got talking on LinkedIn. And I also want to say for anyone who is curious about Jeff, please absolutely reach out on LinkedIn. He's been a fantastic mentor to me, so I can say for sure that's something you want to do. All right, I just want to wrap this up here and encourage every single one of you who might be listening. Don't forget to subscribe, to rate us, and to review the podcast. Every single comment, we read everything between myself and Emmanuel, whatever the channel it is on, whether it's YouTube, whether it's on Spotify. So that is really helpful when you do that. All right, we're going to get into the last section of the episode, which is lightning questions with Jeff. And it's
Oh, no.
just it's around a 5, 6 questions, and we just like to get to know you further. So first of all, tell us what are top 3 products that you use daily and you love.
Oh, wow. So I use a number of different platforms. I would say the first thing on my list is that my Google Pixel is never away from arm's reach. So I'm always using apps on there like the productivity timer challenge that I use to measure my Pomodoros on a daily basis, Audible where I'm listening to books, or Spotify. So Google Pixel would be the first one. My Sony PlayStation would be my second one. I'm a big gamer. As cred, I would like people to know that I recently platinumed God of War Ragnarok.
Really?
So, oh yeah.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting. Don't worry, we'll connect on that platform. I'm a very big gamer to just.
Finally, a gamer for Emmanuel.
so definitely we can talk platinum trophies. I have a few of them. I basically the last 2 God of Wars I platinumed. And the third one would be YouTube. When YouTube first started, I was like, people aren't going to watch these amateur made videos. They're used to high production quality on their TV, and they'll never actually watch this. But now that's probably one of the primary things that I watch on a daily basis.
Hmm.
Things like Good Mythical Morning, Mark Rober, Adam Savage are all really good watches, I think, from a product perspective, watching their process, their maker processes. So,
Hmm.
That's wonderful. All right, so tell us one product resource that you keep going back to that you'd like to recommend.
well, there's actually a couple. Paul O'Hearn is a great follow on LinkedIn, and Lenny's newsletter and podcast is probably the other one that I look at and listen to all the time.
Wonderful. Now, do you have a list of 3 books that you like to recommend to us?
Sure. So there's the Ryan Holiday series on Stoic philosophy. Right now, I'm working through his latest book, Right Thing, Right Now. So I would recommend that one. Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. And then the third one would be Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks, which I think really changed my perspective on how I see my life and the time that I have to get things done.
Hmm.
Love
I think
that.
I like the last one.
Yeah, same.
Let's give it a go.
I love that. Okay, so when you think about your profession, what would you be if you were not in your current one?
So when I was a kid, I wanted to be a baseball player, and I happened to see one of your other episodes, and I forget his name now, but also was a baseball player, and I would probably been a professional. I would like to think that I could have been a professional ball player, maybe not a superstar, but gotten a few hits.
That's wonderful. Okay, and what's your favorite food?
This is an easy one. Doritos. because besides being delicious, they're also an interesting product case study. If you look at how the flavors that they've created and how they've extended the life of their brand through flaming hot and cool ranch and all the additional flavors that they've created, but they're still delicious.
Okay, on a final note, what's your favorite movie?
Well, I love the John Wick franchise, and I really love the Everything Everywhere All at Once movie that
Mm,
won the Oscar a couple years back. But if I had to pick one, it would probably be Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh, okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. Definitely love that one. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Jeff. This has been really wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
All right, till next time, everyone. It's been great. I hope you enjoyed this episode and see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye.